And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to the turning point for IT in Sri Lanka. And today is, of course, the last day of the major rallies in Sri Lanka. And whilst they're doing their thing, letting you know what they intend to do, right here on the turning point, we do our thing and let you know about a matter today of grave importance, because all the political parties, all the candidates, they all mention this in terms of revenue collection, and that is usually about taxation. Much of the country complains that taxes are high, and so the government says it's essential. These are hard decisions that have to be taken, that have been taken, and some say that the taxes will come down if they come into power. Let's find out really about all this and more. Our guest tonight is the founder and the chairman of the company Gajma & Co. They're taxation specialists, and we have the taxation specialist, Mr. N.R. Gajendran. Good evening, Mr. Gajendran.
Good evening for us.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come. Busy schedule and all of that. To start with, what was the economy like? What's your perspective on the economy of the last 2 years?
Yeah, when we went into the crisis, we had multiple crises, starting in 2018 with the political coup. It was followed by in 19 with the Easter Sunday attack, and then came the COVID, and we had the financial crisis. And we remember in October, people couldn't stay at home because there were power cuts going over almost for 12 hours. And they couldn't come to the road because there was no fuel for their transport. And there was an uprising, and the incumbent president at that time became a fugitive, and then the new leader came in and it took over. Now after 2 years, we have no queues, no power cuts, and there is an election now. Last 2 years, whatever said and done, there has been some stabilization. Normalcy has been restored. Whether this is going forward is the next question and challenge.
And then how has revenue, obviously we've entered into an agreement with the IMF. Our DSA, which we give the IMF, has indicated various parameters and so on, and the IMF have been assured of a certain amount of revenue collection. How has our revenue collection been over the last 2 years?
In 2021, we had a revenue which was right at the rock bottom.
Right.
Because when 2019-20, the government at that time came into power, they slashed all the taxes. VAT was brought down to 8, income taxes were brought down to individuals to 18, and at that time NBT was abolished, and we lost about 650 billion revenue.
650 billion
revenue, and 21 our tax to GDP was almost at abysmal low of about 7%.
Okay.
And 22 it was corrected to some extent, and our revenue came to about 2 trillion.
Right.
And 23 we budgeted for about 3.4 trillion, but we will be achieving about 3 trillion, about 50% more than 22. And for 24 we have been budgeted at about 4.1 trillion. Now it is like this: in a democratic environment, taxes are inevitable for us, because in a democracy you need money for education, healthcare, to look after the vulnerable, for infrastructure facilities and investments that will not go where the private sector will not go in for. Then you have for safety and security reasons. But basically Sri Lanka doesn't need so much of money because there are 22 million people, and we have, it's a small island, it's easy to manage the economy. Basically we have our environment is clean and pure. We have fresh air, we have sunlight almost 24 hours a day, We have green all over the place. So we don't need so much of money. But really we have been, crisis, I think many say the crisis was given to us by the politicians. The corrective measure by the IMF was focusing on revenue. Excessive focus. Whether we put forward our plan of action or not, I wouldn't know whether the government had enough time to put forward the plan of action, because when the government changed over, you can remember our authorities in a rushed manner when the decision was made to go to the IMF. They went in, and I don't know whether they were ready with the facts and figures to negotiate and put our story to the IMF.
It must have been pretty challenging anyway, because as the Parliament appointed the Prime Minister and then thereafter the President, there was no space. The Ministry of Finance, the old Parliament had been overrun, and the President's house had been overrun, and there were houses on fire, including the now President's house had been set on fire, and several. There was basically a breakdown in rule of law. But thankfully, we didn't have a constitutional crisis, in the sense because somebody came forward and took it on, and Parliament backed that person. The rest is where we are now. But Mr. Gajendran, we have had different people from different political backgrounds here, and they all say, when we say, how are you going to fund this shortfall, or how are you going to put more money in the pockets of the people, how will you bring the prices down? One of the things they say is about the customs revenue and about the taxation, that we will ease the burden. But easing the burden means you have to find that money from elsewhere. So how are we doing in terms of that? Is our revenue collection in a good place or in a bad place?
You know, if you see this time election, unlike before, every party, major parties, are focusing on taxes. Because, you know, as I said, taxes is inevitable in a democratic country, but if taxes become unbearable, it is unaffordable, then it could challenge the legitimacy of the tax, and it could even challenge the governments. So you can see the rates that have been introduced and the sources of taxes which have been identified and imposed. Now they are going in even for a notional imputation tax on rent income.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that
you know, if you own a residence,
your principal home?
So now, of course, initially it was not mentioned. Now the principal home, it is being told it will be exempt.
Okay.
But initially in the proposal in the IMF release, it is
just says a home.
So even if it is a principal home, the rent is going to be imputed. That means it is a notional amount of income. So they have gone and exhausted almost every possible avenues of taxation.
So they've looked into every little nook and cranny.
And with all this, and 2025, we are trying to achieve tax to GDP of 13.9%, just less than 14%. Now, if you see in our comparative countries, our stage of development, and even Sri Lanka, in the 90s, our tax to GDP was about 20 to 22%. Now, with all this song and dance, we are struggling to reach 14.9% in 2025, 13.9% auto tax to GDP. So my question is, where is this balance? We had 22%. Now with all taxing every possible thing, there is nothing else to be left now to be taxed. Where is the balance? I think I will put it down to the misfeasance, malfeasance, non-feasance and palm greasing, basically corruption in simple words. Money is lost through large-scale evasion, and it's not the small and sundry people. It is the big.
It's happening somewhere.
It is the big players. The big players, the people who are possibly leading or guiding the destinies of the country, has the harm. That is the reason we are unable to raise this revenue.
Well, I just want to explain a very small story, a very short one. I was on the way back from the northeastern coast yesterday, and I was explaining in the car to my very bored producer as to how you can check actually whether these high-end cars have paid the right amounts of duty. There is a way that we can, as journalists, we can find out. And as an example, there was a car in front of me. It seemed to be quite a new Range Rover. I took a photograph. And today, whilst we were waiting for you in this car park here at ITN, we went to the RMB website and we had a look to see what that car was. And according to the RMB website, and we had made no mistake on the registration number, I have all this, I can prove it. I'll be posting it on my website soon. We noticed the car that we saw on the road was a Range Rover. In the RMB website, the car with the same registration number is a Toyota M600 or 400, some M something tank. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the Toyota tank vehicle has had a price tag of around 9 million rupees. The Range Rover in question, that model, the base model is around, hovering about 100,000 sterling pounds. That's an awful lot of money. So this means that some mega fraud went on there. The correct duties were not paid. Oh, it says there, that you should pay the duties and all that. It hasn't been paid. This is just one car, total random, utterly random. It just happened to be in front of me when I decided to take a photograph. So compound that by thousands of cars, and you might begin to see the problem why revenue is not collected properly.
There you see, for us. Don't you think it's a tragedy?
Oh, it's absolute tragedy.
Don't you feel sad about this?
I feel sad because I spoke on the way back in a place near Madampe, on the road, on the side there of a temple, of a Buddhist temple. I asked him, where do you live? And he said, on the road, here. And I asked him again, and he said, well, I don't want to really talk to you because I'm frightened that I might get thrown out of the place that I am.
So don't you think, Farah, this is outrageous?
Why should these poor people pay for, if you want to have a Range Rover or a Bentley Mulsanne or whatever you want, and you've got the dolly and the lolly, then go ahead. But pay the taxes.
So the slippages and leakages at the level of customs could happen in two ways.
Right.
One is on invoicing side.
Right.
Other one is on the classification side.
Right.
Your story, what you are saying, is a pure, faking or altercation of the classification.
Right.
And for this to happen, it can't just accidentally happen.
No.
It is a line of authorities are involved to go without being caught, and there is, as you see, there is immunity and impunity. We are in search of trustworthy leaders to be trusted in this election, because our leaders who have been trusted, people have questioned whether they have been trustworthy. So we are in search of trustworthy leaders to be trusted. Now, whoever the leader who emerges, can put this right, because if you put this right, you know where the revenue is leaking.
But if you imagine the executive president is up here, and the officials who are registering this car are down there. I think it's a bit much to ask the executive president or the prime minister or even maybe the minister. But maybe the minister should be more proactive and visit these places. I remember Gotabaya Rajapaksa went to the RMB in Virahera and made a big song, dance and whatever. But clearly nothing has happened because totally random. I find a Range Rover has been registered as a Toyota M something tank. It's a tiny little car. It's a lovely car. It's 997 cc. Do you know how much the Range Rover, how many cc it is? It must be 5 times that. Absolute fraud. But we'll come back to you, Mr. Gajendran. This is the turning point. It's now time for a break. And we'll be right back with Mr. Gajendran.
ගුණ පරපුරක සහතිකය ඇංකර්.
බංකොලොත් කමට හෙට වෙන්න යන දේ. සජිත් පාක්ෂිකයන්ගෙන් ඉල්ලන දේ. ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැති ප්‍රශ්න පත්තරේ. පිපුරුණු හිස්බුල්ලා. දෙස් විදෙස් පුවත් රසක් සමගින් හමුවෙමු සවස් 6:30 අපගේ ප්‍රධාන ප්‍රවෘත්ති විකාශයත් සමගින්.
ඔයා ෆියුචර් රෙඩි වෙන්න ඕන. ඒ වෙනුවෙන් මම හැමදාමත් ඔයත් එක්ක අවුරුදු 6ත් 11ත් අතර දරුවන් සඳහා වැදගත් පෝෂ්‍ය පදාර්ථ 24ක් අඩංගු සස්ට්‍රජන් ජූනියර්.
කමුද මචං ප්‍රීමා කොත්තුමි ෆන් තමයි.
ප්‍රීමා කොත්තුමි ෆන් තමයි. නව බෙස්ට් එවර් සන්ලයිට්. පෙරටත් වඩා සුවඳක් සමගින් සුපිරි සේදුමක්.
බුද්ධිමත් ඇගේ තීරණය ප්‍රීමා ස්ටෙලා. අපි හැමෝම කැමති.
වීව එකතුණු උකුතේ එකක
රස උපරිමයි.
ඊයේ අර ශනිදා වාසනාව ඇතුණු කතාව කියන්නකෝ.
සුඳුරු පැතුවල් විදහා හිරුහා විශ්වාසයේ දිනනවා මට කීවා හද තුළ මැරුණා ශනිදා වාසනාව ජීවිතේ වෙනස්
පායන හිරුමෙන් විශ්වාස ශනිදා වාසනාව කෝටි 5 නැරඹෙන සුපිරි ජයමල්ලක් 20 ලක්ෂයේ 2 ලක්ෂයේ තෑගි ගොඩක්.
ලක්ස් කියන්නේ සබන් ගැටයක් විතරක් නෙවෙයි සමට සත්කාරයක්. නව ලක්ස්. Introducing Prima Kothumi Korean Ramen.
Let's fire it up.
ඉරක් උදා වෙන හැම දවසක් පැතුම් සැබෑවන සුබ දවසක් අත පුරා ජය දෙදන හොඳ දවසක් අද කෝටිපති දැසි වසින දවසක්
කෝටි භාගින් නැරඹෙන ජයමල්ලක් දිනපතාම පිරිනමන අද කෝටිපති සමග හැම දවසක්ම සුබ දවසක්.
ස්පයිසි ෆන් බයිට් එක විවර කරන්න. බීට් එක රීමේක් කරන්නට වෙන්න. හදවත වවලා යන්න. කින්දර ෆැෂන් කරන්න. ෆන් උතුරන්න. කොත්තුමි කික් එක මෙන්න. ප්‍රීමා කොත්තුමි ෆන් තමයි.
ඔබට උරුම ජයක් ජයෝදා මෙවර ජයෝදා ජයමල්ල රුපියල් කෝටි 2 ඉක්මවයි. අදම ඔබේ ටිකට්පත් මිලදී ගන්න. ජීවිතයම එළිය කරන සංවර්ධන ලොතරැයිය.
Introducing Prima Kothumi Korean Ramen.
Let's fire it up.
කෑෂ් වෙනුවට පීපල්ස් බැංක් ඩෙබිට් කාඩ් වලින් ගෙවීම් කරන්න. රුපියල් 55,000ක් වටිනා තෑගි දිනා ගන්න.
සෞදි කටාර් ඕමාන් මහා සම්මුඛ පරීක්ෂණ සැප්තැම්බර් 23 සඳුදා. පාස්පෝර්ට් නැතත් එන්න. විදේශ නියෝජිත පැමිණෙයි. ඔබේම කුරුණෑගල ග්‍රීන්වේ ඒජන්සීස්.
පැතිවරණ දිස්ත්‍රික්ක 22ක් මේ 17කින් වූ ජනතා බලාපොරොත්තුවක්. රට දිනවන අභියෝගී මේ ළඟ මනාපය. Presidential Election 2024 කවුරුද ජනතා බලාපොරොත්තුව. සැප්තැම්බර් 21 පස්වරු 1 සිට live from ITN's HD studio unveiling Sri Lanka's future. ලාංකීය ටෙලිවිෂනයේ ප්‍රථම ප්‍රදර්ශනය.
තන වැඩි වෙලාවක් ඉන්න එක නෝනට හුරු නෑ. කැමති නම් නෝනා මහත්තයා මගේ ගෙදරට එන්න.
සැකය, බිය, අභිරහස්, මුසුවූ වින්දනයක්. මෙමරි සැප්තැම්බර් 21 රාත්‍රී 10:30ට.
ජනාධිපතිවරණයට පෙර සහ පසු
වරුණ ජයසුන්දර, නිහාල් තල්දුව, රසික පීරිස්, චින්තක කුලරත්න,
සුධර්මන් සමක තුලාව හෙට රාත්‍රී 10:30ට.
කූල් වෙන්න, ටියුන් වෙන්න, වෑන්!
And welcome back to the Turning Point. I'm with Mr. N.R. Gajendran from Gajma & Co, Senior Tax Consultant. Mr. Gajendran, will the taxes have to go up again, or is there room, scope for it to come down?
The way I've understood this, I don't know whether there are any great avenues to tax in that sense. And I think that has been acknowledged even by the IMF. There's a point of exhaustion. Whether these rates will go up, very unlikely, because most of the parties have said they are going to adjust the income tax rates, particularly for the individuals, and the different options have been given. And some are saying that even on the value-added tax, some essential products and services like food, basic food, education, and pharmaceuticals will go free of tax. Some of these consumption taxes has to be, because you can tax people, but you can't overtax to be point of unbearable situation. And then you will stifle consumption, you will stifle the economic activity and growth. So it's a chicken and mouse situation. I think we have reached the tipping point, and if you use the Laffer curve, already any further tax can bring the tax revenues further down.
I see.
Any further tax.
So we're at the point of...
Yeah, I think this has to be done scientifically. I don't think imposition of tax or variation in the taxes and exemptions and reliefs have not been given scientifically in ad hoc matter. I think sooner or later the finance ministry has to go into full research team to make where they can track and trace. And I feel why we are struggling is there is an untapped, uncharted territory which has escaped taxation. One of the examples you gave of the vehicle that you saw. So there are so many stories like that. So this has to be, I think this has to be put right. And also the other side is we have to look at the expenditure in a serious manner. Though still tax expenditure GDP is about 20-21% comparable to other countries. But there are areas of waste, corruption, where you will have to focus if we want to get this country back on track.
And I know there's trouble in Bangladesh and so on, where actually total breakdown in the rule of law has also meant that factories have been burned. That's really bad news, because if you remember back in the 80s, 83, one particular group lost 6 of its factories, and another one also lost their factories. Losing factories is not the same as going bankrupt. It means we have to rebuild. And so when you look at that aspect, the investment by corporates to injecting money into the economy, how does Sri Lanka compare regionally in terms of corporate taxes and so on?
In the corporate taxes, if you see in the region, we are basically comparable. India is, it has a 25% rate and 30% rate depending on the turnover. And there is surcharges which goes to 7%, and there is another education tax of 4%, so it can be 25 plus 7 plus 4, or 30 plus 7 plus 4, it can be as high as that. Pakistan is about 29%, Bangladesh is about 27.5%, Bhutan is 30%. The corporate taxes in that sense is comparable. If the area or the people who are why they are agitating or they are dissatisfied with the taxes is on the individual taxes, because the individual taxes phenomenally just increased on a bang manner. From 18% it went to 36%. It was 24, they brought it to 18, it went to 34%. And also it happened almost at the same time where the purchasing power of our rupee dropped substantially, because when the rupee depreciated from 180 to 200 rupees to 360, 380, the purchasing power substantially eroded. So it is a double whammy especially for the individual people. Basically anyone's wealth, whether rich or poor, whatever the wealth he had, because the value wise in real terms it has dropped, and the taxes also has increased. Earlier we had only VAT at 8%, now consumption tax is at 20%. The highest marginal rate of tax was 18% at one stage, over 9 million rupees. Is now over 3.7 million, it is 36%. So there is some correction that has to be done to give relief to the individual people, and that is on the cards.
And if we were ever to go backwards, do you think it is again possible? We've now got 5.6 billion reserves and all of that. If we go backwards again, do you think we might go the way of Bangladesh?
Basically for us, if this country is to come out of this shell, if we come out of this crisis, whoever the leadership comes in, I feel there has to be two qualities. I said we are in search of trustworthy leaders to be trusted.
Yeah.
Two qualities is, one is the aspect of honesty.
Yeah.
And the second one is they must be competent to do the job. So basically, if we are going to compromise on this, the intent of honesty, because the politicians are making decisions on the lives and livelihood of the people, so they can't play with fire. So if you are going to go back, and unless we are going to put this, and also competent means you should have people who are able to, that doesn't mean the leaders or leadership need to be totally aware and competent on every field, but they can, when they get experts, but they must be informed and learned, and they must have acquired wisdom to understand and make the correct decisions. If you do that, this is simple, we'll be out of this problem out of it. But if you don't do it, if you allow the instances for like what you are happening, you said, is going to proliferate, then we can go behind Bangladesh, or we can have multiple crises. It's not rocket science.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe told me when I interviewed him that he knew that the economy was nowhere near a grave, and when he took it on. It reminded me of what you just said. But Mr. N.R. Gajendran, thank you ever so much for being my guest today. Thank you.
Thank you, Faraz.
And that's the way it was on The Turning Point for ITN Sri Lanka with Mr. N.R. Gajendran. And we'll be back with another show tomorrow. Take care and bless you all.